Welcome, welcome. I see that it is now 2:45, and that's when we're officially starting. So again, welcome. My name is Ashley McCoy. I am here today. Hopefully you're in the right place. We're going to be talking a little bit about what's behavior got to do with it. So really kind of the focus for the next hour that we're together. So we're going to be looking at how we can integrate AAC, so augmentative and alternative communication, and behavior analysis. And so I'm looking forward to doing that with you as we go through this next hour. So I am going to share some slides. I know I have some assistance, so thank you so much in helping to monitor the question and answers. But I also want to encourage you, if you have a question, please feel free, type it in the Q&A in the chat. If you want to just kind of shout it out, that's okay with me too. So at any point, definitely please feel free to ask questions throughout. And we'll just go ahead and get going. I'm going to do, hopefully you all can see that, okay? Again, if there's difficulties, please someone just flag me down, let me know. So we're going to go through a little bit, as I mentioned. I do want to start by letting you know that I do have no financial relationships either or non-financial relationships to disclose, and I'm thrilled to be with you today. So I am actually going to give you just a little bit of an overview of where we're headed. So again, as I mentioned, we're going to talk a little bit about AAC and behavior analysis. We're going to talk a little bit of the rationale. Why are we talking about this? We're thinking about some common functions of behavior. We'll talk about then some communication interventions specific to AAC. And I do have, again, a time reserved for questions at the end. But again, if you have questions, I definitely welcome them throughout. So please don't feel like you have to wait, but I will also do my best to reserve some time at the end for questions and discussion. So I do want to start a little bit about me. So one of the joys of these virtual kind of conferences is that I'm able to attend with you when I might otherwise not have been able to. So I'm actually currently in Northwest Ohio. I am a special education professor at Bowling Green State University in Northwest Ohio in Bowling Green, Ohio. And I am thrilled to be with you, to be part of your conference and to hear all the wonderful things that are happening around assistive technology. So I just want to give you a little bit of a background on me and why I feel like maybe I can talk about this topic. Maybe you're kind of thinking, who am I and what do I have to offer, what my background might be. So I actually have my background academically. So I have spent a lot of time in school. I really love learning. So I did my bachelor's degree in speech language pathology and audiology. And while I was there, I also minored in special education. And one of the clients that I had was a young lady with autism. And she just completely changed my mind on what I wanted to do, my career kind of trajectory. I knew I still wanted to work in education, but I really wanted to focus on special education. So I went then and got my master's degree in severe special education, and then continued on and got a second master's in assistive technology. And I really felt like at that point, that was a nice kind of wrap up, putting it all together on my interest. Little did I know then, as I was working as an educator, I found the world of behavior analysis, of applied behavior analysis. And so I did some additional kind of professional training. I'm now board certified at the doctoral level, as well as a certified Ohio behavior analyst. And so I feel like those pieces all kind of fit together. And then I found in a kind of culmination, I did my PhD from Penn State, focusing specifically on individuals with autism who use augmentative and alternative communication. And so that then really was kind of that culminating piece that brought all of my interest, my experiences together. And thinking about some of my background, I was a special education teacher, so K-12. I worked in private and public schools for 7 years. I taught in a couple of different states, as well as then I was an autism coordinator and applied behavior analysis coach. This was a really fun job for me as well because it was providing a development for teachers. And this is a topic that I found that a lot of teachers wanted to talk about. So hopefully it's relevant for you and who you are and where you are as well. And as I mentioned, I'm currently an assistant professor of special education. My teaching, my research really focuses on individuals with moderate intensive disabilities, and that intersection then with applied behavior analysis and AAC, because I think you really can't talk about individuals with moderate and intensive disabilities without considering their communication. And often these individuals will utilize AAC. So I think beginning here, you may be familiar with the term of applied behavior analysis or ABA, but I want to provide us a definition to get started. Well, it's really a science, and it's based on kind of principles of human behavior, but its main goal is to improve socially significant behaviors. And we have a full program on ABA, so I won't try to summarize it here, but it really is focused on improving socially significant behaviors. And I think then that as we think about communication, I think we would probably all say that communication has large social significance. But specifically then, you probably saw this quote if you were looking through the program. I put it in kind of in the information about it, about this session. And I want to read it to you because I think it's really important that individuals with severe disabilities frequently demonstrate challenging behaviors that may serve a variety of communication purposes. And therefore, the communication intervention through the use of AAC is often a component of these positive behavior support plans. And so I think when we're looking specifically for individuals with moderate, intensive, severe disabilities, we see a range of behaviors that are serving some sort of communication purpose. And therefore, it's our kind of job to figure out what they might be communicating and how can we provide them with an alternate means that might be more socially acceptable or might be easier for them to be able to get what it is that they're after, to be able to communicate. And so that is kind of the why of we're talking about this integration, this intersection today. So when we think about this idea of functions of behavior, it's a very kind of technical kind of idea. It's thinking about what is that communication purpose? Why is the individual engaging in that behavior? And I want to put a little asterisk here because I think sometimes when we think about challenging behavior, you might be picturing someone who is having perhaps a tantrum or maybe aggressive behavior, maybe property destruction, things of that nature. And those are certainly areas that we can help identify the function of those behaviors. But we can even think about behaviors as really anything that we can see or observe, something we can measure or collect data on. So there's a wide range of behaviors that we really can help analyze and provide this kind of communication, a purpose. And so I think from that frame, we have a very wide scope of behaviors that's available to us. And I think the question that underlies this idea of function is this idea of reinforcement. Maybe you think about reinforcement, you've had familiarity with this term before, where kind of an idea of something that you want to see again in the future, that you are giving something positive, maybe type of a reward type system. And so ultimately we're thinking about the functions of the behavior. What is reinforcing the behavior? What is maintaining it? What is happening that is kind of motivating to the individual in it is persisting then. So the behavior is going to persist over time. We can think about this kind of in two kind of categories. And so thinking about this reinforcement, what's reinforcing the behavior? Well, it could be that there's something positive that's reinforcing the behavior. We're thinking about positive in the sense that something is simply added, right? So we're breaking down this term. Positive really just means that something's added, and reinforcement is saying that there's going to be an increase in that future behavior. So positive, we may or may not see it as something that's desirable, but to the individual, it's the addition of something that increases their behavior. Well, on the flip side here, we have this idea of negative reinforcement. And I think we have this connotation with the word negative that can be kind of scary. Maybe it comes off as something maybe critical or negative, if you will. But in this definition and the way we're going to think about it today, it's simply that negative means that something is removed. So something is removed from the environment, removed from the individual, and that removal creates an increase in the individual's behavior. So ideally, all of this is going to be communication behavior. So all of this is going to be communication from the individual that when they say a certain item or they activate a certain icon on their device, that in the future, they're going to continue that because something positive, that addition of something was enjoyable. On the flip side, those communication behaviors that we see, they're going to remove something. And in that removal, there'll be an increase in using those behaviors in the future. Now let's talk about what that might be. So a couple of examples here in this photo, you see an individual who is selecting this icon of more. Well, this more selection could be then that when he communicates, requesting that more, something is given to him. He is added something to his environment. So maybe it's more time with a preferred activity. Maybe it's more of something to eat or something to drink. So then the addition of something that follows his communication behavior of more, if that is something that he likes, then we're likely to see an increase in the future of that requesting more. Similarly, if you think then about this negative reinforcement, next to him on this board, I don't know if you can see, it's the word stop. Well, let's envision this individual is in a classroom and there is loud music playing. And so the student goes over to the teacher and indicates stop. The student is asking for the music to be stopped. And so the removal, the ending of the music is then reinforcing to the individual that is desirable. And so we see in the future when there's loud music, the individual uses their communication of stop in order to be able to access that removal. Now, this is an ideal scenario because one of the reasons we're talking about this is that not all of our individuals have this level of communication already. And so they're going to use types of behaviors, other behaviors, sometimes challenging behaviors, to be able to access these ideas of positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement. So one other thing I want to mention is this kind of little call out button here about socially mediated. So both examples that I gave you require another person. So in some way, the other person is going to give something or take something away. So this idea of positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement does involve someone else, which is perfect because often with our communication, we are talking to someone else. And so it does rely then on some sort of communication partner. And those kind of responses will be really important as we go on. So when we think about then, we tie this back to functions of behavior, thinking about how we can tie reinforcement to functions. There's a common acronym that you may or may not have heard. It's called Everybody Eats. And so here it is, the EATS, and it stands for escape, attention, tangible, and then sensory. And so we're going to kind of talk about how those fit in with this idea of reinforcement. So what is reinforcing the individual within these types of categories? So if we're thinking about the idea of positive reinforcement, that something is added, it's likely then that the individual is trying to get something or trying to access. Now, what could that be? Well, it might be that they're trying to get attention or access attention. It might be that they're trying to get or access a preferred toy or preferred activity, even a preferred person, right? Going back to that attention piece, thinking about getting or accessing a preferred food or drink item, right? So, all of those pieces that when the communication happens, whether it's by an appropriate means of communication or through behavior, they're going to get or access those items. Similarly, with that negative reinforcement, it's likely that the individual is trying to escape or to avoid. And we know this because with negative reinforcement, something is removed, something is taken away, and that increases the behavior. So, again, thinking about the individual might want to escape or avoid attention. Have you had anybody who did not enjoy high praise or positive attention? That was, in fact, maybe overstimulating for them. And so they may try to escape or avoid that. They may try to escape or avoid being called on in class or communicating with peers. Those all kind of fall into this attention category. We may also have individuals who might want to escape or avoid toys or activities. One I see very often is trying to escape from a non-preferred task, trying to avoid doing work that we don't enjoy. And I think if we were really honest with ourselves, we probably all do that, right? So there might be tasks that we have on our to-do list and we really just don't want to do them. And so we keep putting them off, putting them off, putting them off, right? So in the same way, we might see individuals engage in some sort of challenging behavior or communicative behavior to indicate that they are not interested in that activity. And similarly, you might see someone try to escape or avoid from food or drink. Right? So these are just some kind of common examples when we're thinking then about functions of behavior and that positive and negative reinforcement. So let's take a quick look. I'm going to try to show you a little video here. Um, let's see how well I do. I may have to stop it for just a quick second and then we'll come back. So if you hang with me here. I lost my Zoom window. Thank you for your patience. Here we are. All right. So again, when we think about this idea of challenging behavior, this individual might be displaying something that you've seen. So as you're watching this video, I want you to think about what is the individual trying to communicate? What might possibly be that idea of that reinforcement? What's reinforcing his behavior? Why is he doing what he's doing? So let's take a look here. I will warn you, if you have headphones in, I don't know the volume, so please just be mindful. You may want to take one ear out. I also want to give you a heads up, there will be some crying. So this individual is going to engage, if you can't tell by the video title, there will be some crying. So just if that's a trigger for you, I just want to give you warning that there will be some crying in this video. All right, so I'm going to stop there. I think you get the idea of what might be happening. So take a second and think about this idea of reinforcement. What's happening with this individual? What are they perhaps trying to communicate through that maybe crying or tantrum type behavior? And I'm going to give you a second to kind of think through maybe what you might be thinking. If anyone wants to throw items in the chat box too, you're welcome if you have thoughts you want to share. All right, so let's kind of process this a little bit. Yeah, great. Yes, great. So I have a couple comments, right? I would agree. I would definitely agree with you. It looks like he might be wanting to get some attention. So he's really looking for someone else. I see, Paige, you mentioned that socially mediated. Exactly. We're thinking about somebody else. He's wanting somebody else to pay attention to him. He's wanting some attention. And so we see that as soon as that person leaves, he follows. He's really seeking perhaps the attention from mom. We don't really see a whole lot in the video of who it might be, but it might be mom. There might be a preferred person he really wants to engage. When he's not getting that type of attention, right now his communication response is to fall down on the floor, to cry, right? To roll around, right? So he's engaging in these types of behaviors in an attempt to get mom to respond to him, to get some attention. Now, we don't know a whole lot about this individual. It's a YouTube video. It comes from America's Funniest Home Videos, right? But thinking about what has happened in the past, well, it's probably likely that at some point when he cried or fell down, mom did provide attention, right? So mom, right, thinking, right, she's wanting to attend to those types of behaviors. He has now then learned that to try to get attention, he can do this. Now you see here she's doing a really nice job of kind of ignoring the behavior, but it's likely in the past that she's probably responded to him in his crying, and that attention is what is kind of motivating or reinforcing that behavior. Let's look at another example, right? So again, I mentioned that with individuals, we're thinking about using communication, but sometimes communication is more challenging in their challenging behavior. Again, that crying that we just saw. So I'm going to share my screen again. Now we're going to look at this example. Just going to make sure. Great. So we're going to watch here just for a second. And again, think about what is this individual doing? What are they trying to communicate with the behaviors that they're using?
Push. You want to push the sticks? Sticks? Sure.
Twinkle.
Push. You want your push toy? Or do you want sticks? Oh, you want that stick?
Sticks.
I'm gonna play my sticks too. Trade. Trade.
All right. So let's take a second again. What are you thinking about with this one, right? So there's really no kind of loud crying like the last one. We don't see falling down on the floor. So this idea of behavior as communication, what is he doing here that has some sort of communicative function? This one may be a little bit more challenging, right? So thinking about what is he doing here? Okay, so he's doing some motor imitation. Yeah, I would agree, right? So he's playing with those sticks, and the way that he's kind of rubbing them together or patting them, right? So he's doing some of that. That's fantastic. Thinking about right before this individual, so we have the communication partner who's there. Okay, great. So maybe you're thinking about maybe that tangible object, right? So maybe the object itself of those sticks might be reinforcing. So let's think too, with this communication partner, she is providing some assistance. So right before she initially kind of guided his hand to his AAC device, we started to hear some vocalizations. Yeah, right. So when you were in there, when right before, we started to hear a little bit of some vocalizations. And so that may have been something that then she was responding to. She gave him a communicative response. She helped him be able to request the music sticks, right? So now when we have the music sticks, there's a couple things in play. This one may not be as clear. And I bring this example because this is something that might be a scenario that you come across. So this individual has the music sticks, he's rubbing them together, he's patting them. We have the communication partner who is also playing along. So it looks like there may be kind of access to the item, right? So that was something thrown in the chat box there that might be a potential, and I agree. So maybe he was wanting maybe some of that initial vocalization, and then his request through the AAC was specific to those music sticks, so being able to play together. We also have in here, if you remember back, I mentioned that eats, so everybody eats, there's an S, it's plural. S is in relation to sensory. And so we're going to talk a little bit now about sensory. So it may be that the individual wanted to play the music stick. So there was something, you know, it was just a preferred activity. Maybe he likes doing it with that communication partner, but it may be that there's also a sensory component, that the way they sound when they're patted together. If he taps them on his shoulders, you saw a little bit at the end, he was tapping it on his head, right? Again, we're experiencing something through the senses. And so it may be a sensory experience that he is seeking. So it may not be necessarily the activity of music, but rather kind of how they feel or how they sound. And so that brings us in to our kind of conversation about sensory. So again, thinking, you may have heard the idea of kind of sensory before. And so we're going to talk broadly about it in just the idea that it's something that we experience through our senses. And so with this, right, the individual had perhaps those music sticks. And so as he patted them, as he rubbed them together, the different sounds he made may have been that reinforcement for him to be able to engage in that request through his AAC device again the next time, right? So again, that future, he's going to use that communicative behavior to be able to access the sticks, to be able to get some of that sensory feedback. Now, when we think about sensory, it's a little bit different than some of the other forms of reinforcement because oftentimes it's automatic or direct, right? Why is that? Well, if you think about sensory, it's something we experience. It's something that we're personally, either through our hearing, our smell, our taste, our vision, right? So it's personal. It's something that we're directly contacting. Therefore, we don't really need another person to be able to engage in these types of sensory reinforcement. For individuals, you may see that they often engage in the behavior when they're alone. So something like when we have this idea of positive, you have this little guy over here on the right. So positive reinforcement with sensory, we can think about it in that the individual wanted his soft stuffy, right? So his teddy bear there, I guess maybe it's a dog, right? But being able to kind of give him a little snuggle, right? That feeling, the squeezing, right? All of that kind of sensory feedback is added when he gets that stuffy. So being able to make a request for that would allow him access, but the feeling itself is there. It's automatic. It's that direct access when he has that item. And again, I'm sure everybody has experienced, well, I guess I can't say that. It's likely that everybody's experienced some sort of itch, either a mosquito bite or something. And so thinking about that negative reinforcement, that sensory experience, that you want to scratch it, you want to help relieve some of that itch by scratching. And so that's a way that we kind of can think about negative reinforcement. So by adding in the scratching, we've removed that sensation of the bite. And so that's, again, a direct reinforcement. So we don't really need somebody else for that. So these are a little bit harder to think about with communication, but they are very much something that you might see with your individual. And so thinking about some communication behaviors that may be looking for some sort of sensory feedback and how we can help create those communication opportunities for individuals. So how do we determine function? We've been talking a little bit about what those functions might be, but how do we determine them? Well, like we just did. We looked at a couple of videos through observation. That's one of the key methods for determining the function of a behavior. Observe. There are some more kind of indirect ways that we can go about that through some different types of questionnaires. And I'll give it to you here in just a second. I have a link for you. So there's a couple of indirect questionnaires that you might be able to use that have some questions for you to think about when you're observing, thinking about, you could interview a caregiver or someone else. And then thinking about this as a larger part of a behavior assessment. And so through that data collection, through that observation, you might be able to help determine a hypothesis of a function. And I say that because we are simply taking the information we have and trying to make our best guess. Sometimes it's a little bit what we might say more clear than others, but we're always just making a hypothesis. We really don't know. And so that's how I like to frame it, right? So thinking about, we're making a hypothesis, and then you kind of want to test out that hypothesis with the communication intervention. So do you see then with your communication intervention that the behavior either increases those desired communication behaviors, and that the sometimes often challenging behavior is decreasing. So that's how then we can kind of test to see if our hypothesis was correct. So some sample questions, things you might want to think about. So does the problem behavior occur when the person is not receiving attention or when caregivers are paying attention to someone else? Well, if you think back to what we were talking about, this is getting at that idea of the socially mediated positive reinforcement function of trying to get or access attention. And so thinking about divided attention or lack of attention may be a reason why we see individuals engage in challenging behavior as a way to request or communicate that desire for attention. Thinking about the next one there, does the person fuss or resist when they're asked to perform a task or to participate in activities? This example I gave, kind of that non-preferred activity or work task, that's looking at kind of that escape behavior. So are they trying to get away from a non-preferred activity, thinking about then that negative reinforcement. So in the past, when this behavior occurred, were those challenging or non-preferred tasks removed? And so thinking about what might be a better communication alternative rather than that challenging behavior. And then this last one gets at that sensory piece we just talked about. So do they seem to enjoy that behavior even if no one else is around? And this is important to think about. So if you consider that individual in the second video where he's playing with his music sticks, at one point he does put his head down, he's engaged in the task himself, and it really seems as though it may not matter if the communication partner is there, which may give us an indication that there's a sensory component going on with that. So I want to direct your attention. So I have some sample questions here that we just kind of went over, but there's a link here at the bottom. I tried to make it as short as possible so you could jot it down. I've given you the full questionnaires. There are 3 of them up there. Again, I'm going to put a little asterisk on this. You're welcome to use them. You're welcome to look at them. But I do encourage you to make sure you're in collaboration with a team, particularly if this is something that's new to you, that you're working with someone who is more knowledgeable or someone who may have some additional expertise in this area to be able to help with it. But I think it's a great place if you're interested in looking at what these might be. So how do you determine the function? I've given you a couple of resources there. In addition, in that folder, it's a Google Drive folder, you'll find a couple articles that I reference throughout here, some of the citations that you'll see in these slides. I've given you a copy of that as well if you want to read some of the original sources. So that's there for you if you want to check that out. So now let's turn to communication. So there's this idea of then functional communication training. You may hear it as communication teaching. They're kind of interchangeable here, but we're really focused then on that functional communication. We may think about functional communication in its reference to being kind of primary or useful, but in this sense, it's also thinking about function as in what we just talked about. So we want there to be a functional match between the communication we're teaching and maybe perhaps more challenging behavior that the individual is displaying. So again, thinking about that it's meant to help replace those challenging behaviors. And there's a couple considerations here that I want us to kind of go through. So thinking about the response match, and this is that function piece. This is what we just spent some time talking about. So what it is, whatever it is that we want to teach the individual, whatever communication response, whatever communication we want to teach them, we want it to be matched in function. So if we've decided that it's to get or to access, we want to teach one thing. If we want to escape or avoid, we might want to teach another. And I'll give you some examples here in a minute. We also want to think about the response mastery. So when we're teaching this new behavior, this new communication behavior, how effortful will it be? Well, ideally, we want it to require less effort for the individual than engaging in the challenging behavior. We want to entice them to use this new behavior more so than what has worked in the past. And then we want to think about access to the reinforcement. So will they have quick and easy access to the things that perhaps they might be requesting in those new communication behaviors? We also want to think about that response milieu. So thinking about the environment. So what's happening in the environment? Always a key here is kind of that control. So we want to teach the individual that their communication is going to help them control their environment, that they do have choice, that they do have the option, they do have access to control rather than everything being kind of done to them or around them, right? That they are an active participant. And so that's something we want to make sure that communication is teaching them that they have access, they have control in the environment, as well as then thinking about the consequence. And so we want to think about, as we're teaching these new communication behaviors, we want to provide these desired activities or toys or people, right? The attention component. We want to provide them now contingent on that new communication behavior, right? So if we've identified that the individual, so if you think back to some of the videos, right? So if we have that individual who may be engaged in challenging behavior of the falling to the floor, of the crying, of the rolling around, right? So if in the past that has gotten him access to mom's attention, we now want to teach the new contingency that when that behavior occurs, mom is not going to come and soothe the individual, but rather when they use a communicative behavior, something like hug please, that hug please communication request is going to get that access then to the reinforcement that they're seeking. Right? So thinking again, just how we want to shape that new contingency. What worked in the past is not going to work anymore. And so we're going to teach them a new way to be able to access those same types of reinforcement. So here are some examples, some communication matches. So those functional matches, as I talked about. So if we think about the idea, these couple of different functions. So on the left column, we see function. So maybe they want to gain attention. And so I put some possible communicative responses that you might want to teach. And this can 100% be through any type of communication modality. It can be through aided or unaided. AAC, it might be through traditional kind of spoken verbals, right? Whatever it may be that you're working with the individual, you can use these types of communicative responses. Now you can make them more complex or less complex depending on the individual you're working with, but gaining attention, simply look, right? Like, look at me, here I am, right? So I'm wanting someone to pay attention. So teaching the response, the communicative behavior of look or come please. This is one, I have a young son, he's 21 months old. This is one I've taught him. So instead of coming, he used to just come and grab my hand and yank me across the room. And so I started working with him on using the phrase of come please, that he wants me to come with him and then to either look at something or engage in an activity together. So I've taught him that communicative behavior of come please as a way to gain my attention. You might also find that the attention is for assistance. So you might simply teach the requesting of help or the behavior then of help. If the individual might be trying to gain access to a particular toy, activity, or food or drink, you might simply teach more, please, or may I have it? Those would be communicative behaviors that would be desired in place of more challenging behaviors. Now, again, we have a component here of negative reinforcement. So we're thinking about escape or escape from attention in this first one here. And you may want the individual to be able to say, alone, please. They want to be left alone, or no, thank you, or by myself, right? Those might be communicative responses or communicative behaviors that would be a good match rather than a challenging behavior that would get the person to leave them alone. Also thinking about an escape from a task, asking for a break, and then also thinking about, again, that idea of no thank you. And here comes the kicker, right? So when we're teaching these communicative responses, if we're thinking about that we want them to access a new contingency, we have to respond to the request that they're making. So that might mean that initially, if they're asking for a break when challenging work is presented, we honor that communication request. We want to teach them that they have control over their environment, that they're able to communicate, and that whatever form of communication they're using is a valid means of communication when they're using these new types of functional communication responses. Now, over time, you can work in other ways. There's other ways that you can start fading out. But initially, you're going to respond. You're going to allow them that break. You're going to allow them to have more. You're teaching that communicative response. So let's go back again. We kind of thought a little bit here about our individual on the floor. Maybe he's going to ask for attention. Maybe he's going to ask for something specific. Now, I should go back here for a second. So I wanted to also mention, as I just said that you may teach more broad responses. So something that could be applied across settings or scenarios or requests. So something like come please, or more, or help. But you may also want to teach specific requests. So it might be that the student really prefers the iPad. And so you might teach them to request specifically the iPad instead of a more generalized response of more, right? So there are several ways you can go about this. I typically start with a more generalized response, so something like what you see here, because there are often more opportunities for it to be applied when we start actually working with the individual in their communication intervention. So again, as I mentioned, maybe we do want to teach this little one to ask for a hug, right? Or it might just be simply come please, right? They want mom to come. So it might not even be that there's some sort of desire for closeness or snuggling, but maybe it's just simply to be able to access attention. And so something more simple of come please, or are you free, right? So those types of responses, those types of communication, rather than him laying here on the floor crying. Now, if we think about this individual in the second video with the AAC and the music sticks, we might also, right, we see him asking for those communication sticks. And so they're immediately presented to him. He's given access to them. So this is actually a really great way to think about providing communication for something that may be access, but also have a sensory type of component. And that was something we talked a little bit about before. So being able to request access to the item. Something else that you may see with sensory, right? So thinking about music. So you have to ask for the access to the music, but then there's that enjoyment of being able to listen to it. So again, it may have a sensory component, but that one is still mediated by someone else. And so you could very similarly teach the request of the access. So more or music, kind of depending on how you want to teach it. So what do we know specifically about AAC? Well, we do have a large body of research, and that does show that functional communication training, what we just kind of went through, thinking about the response mastery, the response match, the response milieu, and the consequence, right? So teaching in that kind of systematic way, we do have effectiveness with individuals who utilize a range of AAC systems. So that could be low tech, it could be high tech, it could be aided or unaided, right? So all of those types of AAC systems are appropriate for using when you're teaching functional communication. Now, one of the things then you might want to consider is, does the individual already have an AAC system in place? And if so, then how can that be used to teach these new communication behaviors? We also then want to think about responsiveness of partners. And this is something I mentioned. When the individual is utilizing that new communication behavior, we want to respond. So when we're thinking about AAC, we want to think about how likely is it that the individual is going to be heard, that the individual will have that opportunity to communicate with the partner. And so there are a variety of considerations. This comes, one of the great considerations I like about this comes from Duran 1999. It's a little old. Can you believe it's already, what is that now, 21 years? But he provides the example of, we think in maybe a setting where there might be other students, so maybe in a school type setting, that maybe a speech generating device might be more beneficial because of the voice output, that we might be able to hear that, and the teacher or maybe other classroom staff might be able to respond to the individual more consistently. There was some research that came out that using low tech boards, sometimes just the selection of the icon, because it did not provide any type of output of speech output, that sometimes those communication behaviors went unnoticed, right? So thinking about within the environment, what is likely to be noticed? But then in the flip side, if you take that speech generating device to a loud setting, I know in our current circumstances, it might be a little bit different, but if you were to go to the grocery store and there's a lot of background noise, thinking about the volume of that speech generating device, it may not be something that another individual could hear, right? Depending on that distance. So again, there are a lot of considerations within this item, but you want to consider, we want those communication partners to respond consistently, to be reinforcing those new communication behaviors. So what is it that they're most likely going to be able to respond to? And again, as I mentioned, thinking about then that effort of the response. So how hard will that individual have to work to be able to utilize that new communication behavior versus that old kind of challenging behavior communication? So thinking about the placement of maybe an AAC system, working collaboratively with an occupational therapist, a physical therapist, an assistive technology specialist to really identify an access point for some of our individuals that may not necessarily be a direct selection. Maybe they're going to use some sort of scanning, right? Whatever it might be, those types of resources and kind of considerations, work with team members to think about how effortful that response might be. We want the individuals to use this new communication often. We want them to be able to do it efficiently and with as little effort as possible because we want them to be able to persist in using it. So I think I've done decently well. I was trying to shoot for about 10 minutes to have questions and discussion. I'm going to quickly, before I stop this share, I do just want to put up this next slide because I want to close this out so I can see the chat box or if there are other questions that have come in. But I want to share with you my email. I welcome, if you want to reach out to me via email, you want to talk or have more conversation, I would welcome that opportunity to dialogue with you. So again, my email is up here. It's McCoy, MCCOYAR @bgsu.edu. So I'm going to end this now so that I can hop back over to the chat. So I would love to hear if anyone has any questions or comments or any thoughts. I just kind of want to open it up at this point to see what you are thinking. I teach classes through Zoom, and I always joke with my students that I should have the Jeopardy just kind of theme song kind of playing as a background, maybe encourage someone to hop out there. I mean, definitely, I will be here if you want to ask questions or to talk. That was really what I was hoping to kind of get through, really. Again, so thank you so much for your time, for your participation. Thinking again about those functions, about the individuals that you might be working with, trying to consider those challenging behaviors as opportunities for being able to think about communication and what is reinforcing and how we can give them an alternative to be able to make that. So again, thank you so much for being here. Please email me if you want to talk more. I welcome the opportunity to talk with you. And thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of the conference. I know today was a wonderful day, and there's another day tomorrow of great sessions to learn and to hear from one another. Thank you. Thank you. Those of you, thank you. I appreciate that. Ah, one of your students. That's so exciting. Are you still in here, Shayla? Thank you, everyone.